On March 6, 1945, at 3:47 p.m. in Cologne Cathedral Square, Germany, the periscope of the gunner fractured into a network of fissures as Feldwebel Karl Hoffmann pressed his face to it, struggling to make out the strange outline rising from the debris-littered road. Over 3 years of service, he had committed to memory the shapes of every U.S. armored vehicle: the elevated Sherman carrying its modest 75mm cannon, the Stuart Light models that Tiger operators dismissed as plaything bellies, and even the uncommon heavy Shermans with added plating that failed to breach a Tiger's front armor past 500 meters. Yet this appeared wholly different. "Das ist kein Sherman," he murmured over the radio, his tone quivering in a way his team had never detected. "That's not a Sherman." Peering through the damaged lens, he spotted the immense cannon tube, extended and bulkier than anything from American designs he knew. The body crouched nearer to the ground, sharper in form, featuring inclined plating that seemed molded instead of joined. The turret loomed vast, seemingly oversized for the frame, as if an air defense artillery piece had been affixed to a tank base. His thoughts flipped through identification diagrams, drill outlines, and intel reports. No match emerged. Precisely 18 seconds later, Karl Hoffmann and his squad would join the initial wave of German tank operators in history to realize the U.S. had at last engineered a machine capable of destroying them regardless of distance or position. The Panther, under Wilhelm Battlebohr from Panzer Brigade 106, had grasped this truth just 3 minutes prior. Its 5-member team never managed to transmit details of their demise. The M26 Pershing's 90mm M3 cannon fired the opening shot. The penetrating projectile sped at 853 ms, spanning the 120 meters separating the vehicles faster than Hoffmann could flutter his eyelids. The round slammed into the Panther's forward plating at the turret front, that 100mm shield, which had repelled countless Sherman strikes in France and Belgium, fractured on contact. Retaining massive momentum, the 90mm round pierced the interior space before exploding. The equations behind Allied triumph unfolded not through strategic blueprints, but via manufacturing figures and frontline clashes that upended every notion these fighters held about their foes, their nation, and their mission. The legend of German armored dominance had been forged in metal and sacrifice ever since the Tiger's debut on the Leningrad front in August 1942. During the ensuing 2.5 years, crews in these German behemoths inhabited vehicles that defied core principles of tank combat. Their 88mm weapons could obliterate any enemy tank beyond 2,000 meters. The protective layers, 100mm on the forward hull and 120mm on the turret, rendered them all but impervious to routine Allied anti-tank fire in typical engagement zones. The mental impact rivaled the physical edge. Members of Schwer Panzerabteilung 506 spoke of the unassailable confidence that accompanied piloting Tigers. The numbers backed it up starkly. The U.S. M4 Sherman's 75mm M3 cannon managed to pierce the Tiger's front only inside 100 meters, and solely with specialized rounds at ideal strikes. Conversely, the Tiger's 88mm KWK-36 could rip through a Sherman's bow armor from 2,000 meters. Come December 1944, German operators had honed routines that capitalized on this edge. They stationed Tigers and King Tigers at extreme distances, leveraging sharper sights and firepower to eliminate Allied armor before it neared danger zones. One Tiger routinely stalled full-scale enemy pushes. The standout case unfolded at Villers-Bocage in June 1944, where SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann's Lone Tiger took out 14 tanks, 2 anti-tank pieces, and 13 additional vehicles in under 15 minutes. Although Wittmann perished that August, well before the Pershing's debut, this edge fostered a deep mental boost that rippled past the front lines. U.S. tank teams suffered from Tiger phobia, frequently confusing ordinary German vehicles for Tigers and inflating sightings well beyond reality. At the same time, German heavy tank personnel nurtured a near-supernatural faith in their resilience, adorning barrels with victory notches akin to aviator tallies. Unbeknownst to these assured operators, some 8,000-kilometer distant in Detroit's tank factories, U.S. designers had toiled since September 1942 on an initiative coded T-26, They crafted a creation destined to dismantle the fable of German armored immunity. The path to the M26 Pershing stemmed from a harsh awakening, U.S. tank development had lagged perilously. The M4 Sherman, the core of American tank strength, dated to 1941 designs, when the fiercest German threat was the Panzer IV with its stubby 75mm gun. By the era when Shermans clashed with Tigers in Italy and Normandy, they lagged in every vital aspect: protection, firepower, power, along with its operational reach. The Pershing Development Initiative stood as an urgent undertaking that engaged 14 primary contractors, 300 supporting firms, and more than 50,000 personnel spanning 22 states. The Fisher Body Division of General Motors, previously focused on assembling Sherman tanks at its Grand Blanc arsenal in Michigan, got directives to swiftly adapt its production lines for this advanced heavy tank. The modifications proved immense: innovative casting methods for the turret, completely redesigned drivetrain assemblies, and above all, the incorporation of the 90mm gun, which had earlier served solely in tank destroyers and anti-aircraft capacities. The 90mm M3 gun exemplified U.S. ingenuity in weaponry. Evolving from the proven 90mm anti-aircraft piece, it propelled a 24 lb armor-piercing projectile at speeds surpassing 2,800 watt of TUS. The typical M82 APC projectile could breach 190mm of armor at 500 watt RD, sufficient to pierce a Tiger's front plating during typical engagements. The advanced T-30E 16H VAP variant, featuring a tungsten carbide penetrator, managed 2mm penetration over the same distance, posing a real danger even to the formidable King Tiger. The project was enveloped in extraordinary confidentiality. Employees at the Fisher Tank Arsenal believed they were crafting an enhanced Sherman model. Parts were fabricated in isolated plants to ensure no single group grasped the full blueprint. As the initial 20 Pershings shipped to Europe in January 1945, they appeared on manifests as heavy repair gear, concealed beneath tarpaulins. January 15, 1945, New York embarkation port. In the shroud of night and with intense safeguards, the debut 20 M26 Pershings boarded vessels headed for Europe. Every tank received protective wrapping and misleading cargo labels. The operators chosen for them had undergone secluded drills at Fort Knox starting in November, bound by oaths of silence enforceable by court-martial. The Atlantic transit lasted 11 days amid U-boat-threatened seas. The Pershings nestled in the vessel's compartments, screened by lines of ordinary Shermans, invisible to nearly all onboard personnel. During the journey, the tank teams reviewed German vehicle identification guides and rehearsed their deception, posing as substitutes for routine Sherman outfits. The Pershings docked at Antwerp on January 26, 1945, once more under nocturnal cover. Special rail convoys then rushed them to the 3rd Armored Division's repair zone close to Düren, Germany. There, the operators finalized setups as Division Commander Major General Maurice Rose directly informed battalion leaders about the innovative armament, February 25, 1945. The lead 4 Pershings joined the 3rd Armored Division's advance toward the Rhine. Each went to a separate task force, camouflaged within standard Sherman platoons, with firm instructions to steer clear of fights except against German heavies. The operators coated them in conventional olive drab paint and applied formation insignia for camouflage, although the extended barrels and sleeker silhouettes betrayed them to observant experts. German reconnaissance shortcomings were total. Even with one of the war's strongest spy networks, the Wehrmacht remained oblivious to the Pershing's presence. Enemy leaders assumed the U.S. adhered rigidly to mass production over superior design, incapable of imagining that American factories could shift to heavy tanks without halting Sherman output. February 26, 1945, near Düren, Germany, witnessed the initial Pershing casualty in action. The T-26E3, dubbed Fireball, fell to a Tiger Warren in a near ambush. The Tiger's 88mm shot hammered the Pershing's gun mantlet, fatally wounding the gunner and loader. Still, the Pershing underwent fixes and rejoined operations on March 7th, highlighting U.S. prowess in restoration and logistics. In the following days, fragmented accounts filtered into German command centers, describing clashes with an unknown U.S. tank boasting a lengthier barrel and tougher plating than the Sherman. One Panther operator described obliteration at 1/800 Nalus from a lone round fired by an unrecognized American machine. Alarmingly consistent across accounts was the mention of a cannon that visibly outstripped the Sherman Standard 75 mm in size and reach. March 6, 1945. The clash around Cologne Cathedral evolved into World War II's best recorded armored showdown, preserved on footage by Signal Corps photographer Jim Bates. The engagement opened with German units stationing their surviving tanks encircling Cathedral Square. Wilhelm Bartelbohr, leading a Panther from Panzer Brigade 106, exuded assurance as U.S. forces neared. The plaza's expanse offered unobstructed firing lanes, while debris piles granted some chassis concealment. At 15:20 hours, Bartelbohr detected activity beside the ruined Garyon Hotel. Peering through his sight, he first described it as a peculiar Sherman modification sporting a prolonged barrel. He commanded his loader to fire at 300 meters, virtually contact distance for a Panther's swift 75-caliber Pulitzer weapon. The Panther. The initial shot came from the Panther, slamming into the advancing Pershing's front plating, yet rather than breaching it, the projectile bounced off in a burst of fiery sparks. Bartelbohr had merely 3 seconds to grapple with this unexpected turn before the counterfire struck. Aboard the Pershing, dubbed Eagle 7, and led by Staff Sergeant Robert Early, the enemy tank had swiftly entered the commander's sights. Corporal Clarence Smuyer, the gunner, aligned the targeting reticle precisely on the Panther's turret shield and let loose. The 90mm shell tore straight through the adversary's turret front. Flames erupted as the onboard rounds detonated. Footage recorded by Jim Bates documented the ensuing action. A second German vehicle close by, accounts differ on whether it was a Tiger or yet another Panther, tried to join the fray, but fell to a lone shot from the Pershing's front-facing weapon. The entire clash wrapped up in under 5 minutes, proving beyond doubt that U.S. armor could now rival German might in destructive power. The loss of those German tanks near Cologne Cathedral sparked a major intel scramble in the Wehrmacht. Directives flew from Oberkommando West, urgently ordering every unit to flag any run-ins with fresh American heavy armor and supply thorough breakdowns of its features and strengths. Reports trickled in, sketching a scene of tech shock that left German leaders reeling. Numerous operators described U.S. tanks boasting 90mm grade cannons and thick forward shielding that took out Panthers and Tigers from distances over 500 meters. Among German tankers, it earned the label Long Barrel Sherman, as they couldn't fathom a brand new heavy tank from America. This confusion lingered for weeks, leading to battlefield blunders as crews tried outdated anti-Sherman strategies against Pershings. The Panzer Troops' preparation network faltered in adapting. Training facilities lacked any data on this novel U.S. machine. Identification guides were absent, and combat guides still claimed American guns couldn't pierce heavy German armor from the front. Come mid-March 1945, about 20 Pershings were active across Europe, with reinforcements landing each week. Though that figure pales against the hordes of Shermans deployed, its mental toll dwarfed the sheer numbers. German operators, used to picking off Shermans without fear, now entered fights gripped by doubt. The combat tallies reveal some of the impact. In the few clashes pitting Pershings against German heavies, outcomes favored the Americans. Yet with just 20 vehicles seeing action, hard data proves tricky to crunch. Far more crucial was the doubt sown. At range, German spotters couldn't tell Pershings apart from Shermans, breeding pauses in every skirmish. Output figures loomed even larger. As Germany limped along at around 100 tanks monthly by early 1945, U.S. plants churned out 2,022 M26 by the conflict's close, including 1,039 from Fisher Body's Grand Blanc facility alone. Tankers picking up on these stats via captured papers or POW chats grasped they weren't up against just a skilled foe. They faced one that could replenish hardware at speeds Germany never touched, even in its heyday. Snagging wrecked Pershing parts and scrutinizing disabled hulks gave German tech experts and crews their initial up-close view of American heavy tank craftsmanship. Findings upended long-held views on U.S. design. The one-piece cast turret demanded fabrication skills Germany hadn't mastered for such massive pieces. The Ford GAF V8 motor delivered 500 horsepower with dependability beyond German power plants. The gearbox featured cutting-edge elements that looked bewilderingly intricate but ran flawlessly. German specialists noted this went beyond mere upgrades. Each part embodied superior innovation. The fire control setup enabled precise shooting on the go, a feat Tigers couldn't match. The electric turret drive spun it a full 360-degree in 15 seconds. Sighting systems rivaled German standards. Insights, especially denting crew spirits, included the roomy cabin, outpacing German layouts with superior layouts for operators. Ammo racks used wet storage methods to curb blazes, an urgent gap in German vehicles. Minor touches like cushioned panels and cabin lights highlighted a focus on operator well-being that German builds had ignored. Word of these American heavy tank prowess rippled fast through the Panzertruppe, further eroding spirits already battered by endless withdrawals and supply woes. Crews clinging to resolve amid dire straits confronted a grim shift. The Americans had stripped away their final edge. German combat principles rested on the belief German armored forces had long relied on the notion of technological edge to offset their disadvantages in numbers. They selected defensive spots where Tigers and Panthers could strike U.S. armor from distances beyond effective counterfire. For attacks, planners figured heavy German tanks could breach American lines while sustaining tolerable casualties. Yet both premises were growing doubtful. This shift showed up in rising accounts of mechanical failures, leading crews to ditch their vehicles. What once prompted on-the-spot fixes amid gunfire now triggered quick calls of total breakdown. Recovery teams came across forsaken German tanks with trivial faults, like loose tracks, drained fuel, or derailed treads, that soldiers had easily mended just weeks before. By late March 1945, as U.S. troops advanced on the Rhine, German tank operators faced an untenable dilemma. Commands demanded they secure bridgeheads against the American push, yet uncertainty clouded every shadow. Each clash turned into a deadly lottery. Were those incoming Shermans or Pershings? This dynamic played out along the entire line. Tanks that formerly held firm now pulled back at the initial sign of trouble. Fortifications meant to endure for days crumbled in mere hours. Though just 20 Pershings mixed in with thousands of U.S. tanks offered little material threat, their mental toll was crippling. By April 1945, organized German tank opposition in the West had shattered. Groups with working vehicles often balked at confronting American armor unless assured no Pershings lurked nearby, a promise no one could make. As a result, numerous outfits halted aggressive moves altogether. The fight for Dessau from April 21st to 24th captured this grim shift. Despite functional Panthers and Tigers among the German side, they stuck to static defenses and shunned long-range duels with U.S. forces. The U.S. assault, blending Pershings with standard Shermans, encountered scant coordinated pushback as German operators opted for retreat rather than risk superior foes. Seasoned tank commanders, tallying scores of victories, left their machines behind to evade potential Pershings. Even whispers of Pershings in an area could prompt full German armored pullouts. The panzer force that overran France and almost toppled the Soviet Union had forfeited its fighting spirit. With defenses folding in late April and early May 1945, countless German tank personnel ended up as captives. U.S. Army interrogators uncovered how the revelation of American heavy tanks had deeply scarred their morale. Battle-hardened fighters repeatedly cited this knowledge as the tipping point. For 3 years, they'd banked on German tech dominance. Outmanned or in retreat, they trusted their Tiger's edge. Discovering U.S. tanks on par or superior rendered the conflict futile in their eyes. Questionings showed most crews never directly met a Pershing. The dread alone dictated their choices. This doubt, unable to tell if oncoming Americans rode Shermans or Pershings, proved just as potent as real battles in sidelining German armor. Post-war German tank operators grasped the full scope of U.S. heavy tank output by 1945. Only 310 Pershings made it to Europe before the German capitulation, and roughly 20 entered action, but U.S. plants churned out over 2,200 MiG-26 tanks by October 1945. The Fisher-Body's Grand Blanc arsenal built 1,739 alone, while Detroit Tank Arsenal under Chrysler contributed 473. Once retooled, lines assembled Pershings in hours, not the weeks Germany needed for Tigers. In contrast, Germany built just 1,347 Tiger Is and 492 King Tigers across the war. U.S. manufacturing muscle outstripped German efforts entirely. The swift switch from Sherman to Pershing lines without slowing production highlighted an adaptability Berlin lacked. Surviving German tank experts later pinpointed awareness of U.S. heavy tanks as a key morale fracture. These weren't green recruits prone to overreaction, but battle-tested pros who knew armored combat inside out. They spoke of a stark divide in their wartime outlook. Prior to hearing of American heavies, belief in German triumph via tech mastery endured. Afterward, they battled merely to endure, hunting evasion over conquest. Veteran responses to this stood in sharp contrast to their handling of other Allied breakthroughs. Amidst applause and cheers, the Germans had shown remarkable adaptability against overwhelming odds. In situations of greater enemy numbers, they shifted their strategies. Against dominance in the skies, they shifted to nocturnal movements and camouflage techniques. Yet, achieving balance in tank technology, the key edge they had relied upon since 1942, provided no strategic edge. The downfall of King Tiger operators in the conflict's closing days epitomized the total mental unraveling of the German forces. The King Tiger embodied the height of German armored engineering. Weighing 68 tons, it combined impenetrable plating and devastating armament that rendered it impervious to direct assaults from the front during its entire service. By April 1945, however, operators of these behemoths grew ever more hesitant to confront U.S. armored units. The King Tiger's 150mm front armor and its extended 88mm cannon ought to have preserved its dominance over the Pershing. Still, the mental toll of realizing that the Americans now fielded formidable heavies equipped with potent 90mm weapons induced a state of inaction. Teams that previously charged into battle with assurance now wavered, uncertain if they confronted vulnerable Shermans ripe for destruction or dangerous Pershings that posed a real danger. After the war, reviews exposed the utter shortcomings of German espionage in overlooking the Pershing initiative. Even with vast informant webs and intercepted communications, the Wehrmacht remained oblivious to U.S. efforts in heavy tank creation until Pershings began surfacing on the battlefield. This shortfall extended beyond simply ignoring the Pershing project. German analysts had profoundly misjudged the scale of American manufacturing prowess. They recognized the high volume of U.S. tank output, but presumed it came at the expense of subpar standards. It never occurred to them that U.S. factories could switch to heavy designs without sacrificing their advantages in large-scale production. By April 1945, German mechanized defenses in the West had utterly crumbled. Formations retaining functional vehicles frequently opted out of clashes with American armor. Simply spotting U.S. tanks in an area could prompt German retreats, irrespective of the specific models involved. Solo commanders described frantic efforts to evade U.S. armored threats, growing more frantic by the day. Vehicles got labeled as irreparable after trivial malfunctions that crews would have fixed on site just weeks before. Operators claimed sightings of faux heavies in zones where scouts afterward verified only Shermans were active. In a twist of irony, the mental blow from the Pershing outstripped its battlefield achievements. Though it outperformed German designs in various ways, the Pershing carried its flaws. Its drivetrain often failed, causing frequent stoppages. The cannon, despite its strength, fired more slowly than the German 88mm pieces. The slanted shielding, while effective, was slimmer than that on the King Tiger. On technical merits alone, the Pershing matched a Panther, better in certain areas, weaker in others. It wasn't the ultimate weapon that German operators envisioned, but the fear it instilled stemmed not from specs, but from upending their views of American strengths. Quantifying this proves challenging, as roughly 20 Pershings ever engaged in real fights. The tiny number of instances renders talks of precise destruction rates irrelevant. The true significance lay in the mindset shift, not raw metrics. German operators convinced themselves that the U.S. had reached or surpassed tank equivalents, and this conviction dictated their choices far more than hardware realities. Spotting Pershings hastened German capitulations in the war's endgame. Armor teams who would have battled on with Tigers and Panthers versus Shermans now preferred to yield at the prospect of Pershings. The mental math was straightforward. Battling inferior Shermans with top-tier German machines held promise of survival. But tangling with matching U.S. heavies meant likely doom. This pattern emerged repeatedly along the line. Once the staunchest warriors in the Wehrmacht, German tank operators turned far more prone to giving up. American military intel observed that come late April, captured German crewmen often reached holding areas ahead of foot soldiers from their outfits, a stark flip from earlier norms where tankers battled until depleted. Astonishingly, outfits shifted from the east, where they still overpowered Soviet armor, suffered profound mental turmoil upon hearing of U.S. heavies. These groups showed up brimming with faith in their tech edge, only to learn it might vanish against the Americans. The Schwerpanzerabteilung 5 had shifted from the Eastern Front in March 1945, having knocked out countless Soviet vehicles, from the latest T-34-85s to IS-2s. The operators viewed themselves as unbeatable. Yet mere weeks into the Western theater, the group's performance plunged after tales of brushes with American heavies. The gap between their Eastern triumphs and Western realities bred deep mental conflict. Operators struggled to square their ongoing mastery over Soviet armor, even as they were outmatched by Allied tanks from the U.S. The growing awareness that U.S. forces had not only equaled, but possibly exceeded Soviet advancements in tank technology, all while holding vast numerical edges, fostered a feeling of confronting an invincible adversary. As additional German tank operators absorbed details on the Pershing's features via battlefield accounts and intel sessions, these specifics circulated widely within the panzer divisions. Every fresh insight deepened the blow to spirits. The gyro-stabilized turret, the sophisticated gearbox, the amenities for crew ease, all pointed to U.S. ingenuity that had leaped ahead, outstripping German innovations. Finding out that Pershings featured external phones on the back for infantry to contact tankers directly highlighted American focus on integrated infantry tank tactics, something absent in German vehicles. The ammunition bins designed to suppress deadly blasts revealed a U.S. priority on protecting lives that Teutonic blueprints had overlooked. Bit by bit, these specs hammered home a harsh truth. The Americans weren't merely keeping pace with German armor. They had advanced beyond it in areas overlooked by their foes' designers. For operators long indoctrinated in the myth of Teutonic engineering supremacy, the mental toll was profound. In the closing days of April 1945, the final clashes pitted German heavies against U.S. troops, underscoring a total flip in mental ascendancy. Once Tiger operators had hunted Shermans with assuredness, now they battled amid anxiety and doubt. Standard German tactics urged tackling the gravest peril head-on. Yet the ambiguity in spotting foes froze their choices. Operators wavered, straining to discern if oncoming vehicles were standard Shermans or potent Pershings, forfeiting vital chances to fire first. Such delays frequently sealed their doom, irrespective of the true U.S. model involved. After the conflict, scholars of warfare underscored the Pershing's demoralizing sway over German panzer units. Though few Pershings saw action, complicating hard data, records amply confirmed the hit to their resolve. Figures back this up. Prior to Pershing sightings in the prior 2 months, Western German armor sustained stronger combat viability amid supply woes. Once word of Pershings proliferated, effectiveness plunged sharply, with numerous vehicles ditched rather than wrecked in fights. German panzer teams had forged unshakable faith in their tech edge. This conviction buoyed them amid horrific casualties and endless withdrawals. The Pershing's emergence crumbled that pillar. Deprived of it, crews forfeited the mental bedrock for holding out. Over the years since, ex-German tankers repeatedly pinpointed discovering U.S. heavies as the tipping point signaling total defeat. In gatherings and writings, the refrain echoed, "Tech dominance was our final bulwark, and the Pershing raised it." Survivors often evoked the shock of learning that Detroit's factory hands had crafted machines rivaling Tigers. The democratic powerhouse they were schooled to scorn had attained equivalence in prowess while churning out far more units. This epiphany stung worse than any setback on the field. What wartime panzer crews never grasped would have utterly crushed lingering spirits. The Pershing marked merely the start of U.S. heavy armor evolution. The upgraded T-26E4 Super Pershing, boasting a beefed-up 90mm cannon, rolled out in a run of 25, with a single one hitting the European fray. The T-26E5, sporting thicker plating reaching 279mm, numbered 27 trial models. Further along, the T-29 Heavy with its 105mm main gun sat in testing. The T-30, packing a 155mm piece, progressed in trials. Far from just closing the gap, American armor engineering surged forward, dwarfing German limits while upholding output scales beyond Berlin's grasp. The manufacturing backbone revealed the deeper tale. Come April 1945, U.S. tank factories sprawled across more than 50 million square feet. The Detroit arsenal outpaced much of the Reich's entire output setup. Fisher Body had swiftly converted auto lines to tank assembly in mere months, accomplishment Nazi factories couldn't replicate. Past battlefield and engineering effects, the Pershing sparked an ethical turmoil for German tankers. Propaganda had drilled into them a crusade for Aryan and technical mastery. Spotting advanced U.S. tanks, forged by those derided as racial inferiors, eroded the core creed of their cause. The mental clash hit hardest among Waffen-SS panzer units, picked for doctrinal zeal. These fighters had embraced Nazi racial dogma as their rallying cry. Their deeds provoked profound doubt in the foundational beliefs that had fueled their combat resolve. The emergence of the Pershing tank undermined the racial dominance narratives that underpinned much of their ideology. If the Americans were capable of crafting tanks that outclassed their own, what did that imply for notions of Aryan engineering supremacy? A comprehensive evaluation of the Pershing's influence uncovers a multifaceted narrative. Altogether, 310 Pershings arrived in Europe prior to Germany's capitulation, yet merely around 20 participated in direct engagements. Such a restricted rollout renders any precise assessments of destruction rates against German armor irrelevant from a data perspective. The true significance lay not in the count of enemy vehicles the Pershings eliminated, but in the way their very presence eroded German confidence and influenced battlefield strategies. Archival documents from the Wehrmacht indicate a sharp rise in instances of tanks being left behind in areas where Pershing sightings were whispered about. Rates of crew capitulation surged noticeably once word of Pershing arrival circulated. Preparedness levels among panzer formations fell off considerably, even as various elements played into this downturn. Perhaps the most striking paradox in the Pershing's legacy was that German engineers had devised concepts potentially surpassing U.S. armor, yet these came far too delayed and in insufficient volumes to alter outcomes. Initiatives like the Panther II, E-50, and E-75 embodied cutting-edge innovations that could have preserved Teutonic technological edge, but they remained mere blueprints or experimental models at the time Pershings began rolling off assembly lines. This disparity highlighted the core divergence in how the two nations waged war. The Germans pursued flawless design for each piece of equipment. The Americans prioritized adequate performance, scaled up through overwhelming volume. Once the U.S. attained parity and sophistication via the Pershing, while holding on to unmatched manufacturing dominance, German opposition turned inescapably futile on a numerical basis. The mental jolt from encountering America's proficiency in heavy armor left enduring marks on Wehrmacht strategic thought. In the ensuing years, Bundeswehr principles stressed that assuming tech dominance as a reliable edge would no longer suffice. The German armed forces cultivated a deep appreciation for U.S. manufacturing prowess that endures even now. Numerous ex-soldiers from Germany who relocated to the States post-war pointed to the prodigious output they observed, epitomized by the Pershing, as influencing their choice. If the U.S. could forge such formidable machinery amid upholding civil liberties and economic vitality, maybe that societal model merited adoption. In contemporary times, the few remaining Pershing's grace exhibits across global institutions, mute emblems of Yankee productive triumphs. At the U.S. Army Armor and Cavalry Collection in Fort Knox, One Pershing flanks a seized King Tiger. The exhibit label highlights their comparable specs, yet fails to convey the mindset shift the American behemoth provoked. Wehrmacht survivors touring these sites frequently pondered the dismay of first learning about U.S. heavy tank prowess. The Pershing transcended mere armament. It embodied the redirection of American factories toward rivaling German craftsmanship, without sacrificing numerical ascendancy. Grasping the Pershing's complete repercussions demands examining authenticated figures that illustrate the realm of mental combat. Morale among German armored personnel plummeted following intelligence on U.S. heavy tanks disseminating. With just 20 Pershings in action, detailed tallies of enemy kills hold no statistical weight. 3 to 10 Pershings made it to Europe before VE Day. A total of 2,122 M26 tanks had been built by October 1945. On the German side, they manufactured 147 Tiger AUSFB and 492 King Tiger vehicles over the course of the conflict. Fisher Body churned out 1,639 Pershings by itself. Chrysler contributed another 473. These figures underscore how the Pershing's terror on the psyche dwarfed its modest frontline role. Realizing that the Americans could churn out heavy tanks en masse while the Reich labored to sustain its fleet hit as hard as any physical defeats. The final documented clash between a German tank and a Pershing took place in late April 1945 as hostilities wound down. At that juncture, the emotional toll was irreversible. Panzermen who launched into battle brimming with faith in their engineering preeminence concluded it by recognizing how U.S. democratic industry had equaled and possibly outdone their finest creations. The account of Wehrmacht crews uncovering the Pershing strengths offers enduring insights into the mindset of conflict and productive might. It proves that tech excellence by itself fails to uphold combat viability absent a robust support infrastructure. At a deeper level, it reveals how intangible elements of psyche can eclipse tangible resources in battle. The Pershing's mental blow overshadowed its tangible battlefield footprint. Those 20 machines helped fracture the arrogance of the erstwhile elite Panzertruppe, not via decisive triumphs, but by demolishing the illusion of unmatched German ingenuity. The Panzermen who began the war, utterly assured of their technological lead, wrapped it up realizing American industrial democracy had aligned with and perhaps surpassed their peak achievements. The inner path from predators to prey, from invincible to vulnerable. The conclusion of the conflict, though seemingly swift and one-sided, unfolded over a mere 8 weeks, spanning the debut engagement of the Pershing in late February until Germany's capitulation in early May. The Pershing's genuine triumph extended far beyond the tally of enemy vehicles eliminated, merely 20 in actual clashes, rendering any quantitative evaluation futile. Yet it shattered the unshakable assurance of the Germans. For years, their armored units had battled against formidable forces, buoyed by unwavering belief in their mechanical superiority, only to see that conviction crumble at the sight of formidable U.S. heavies rolling into view. Ultimately, the M26 Pershing achieved what legions of Shermans had failed to do. It eroded the morale of German tank operators. This wasn't due to sheer volume or masterful maneuvers, but rather the stark morale-crushing evidence that U.S. ingenuity had finally bridged the gap. That elongated barrel glimpsed through their viewfinders during those closing confrontations represented more than mere firepower. It signaled the close of a dominant chapter. The German crews remained oblivious to the fact that the American Pershing packed a 90mm cannon potent enough to fell their Tigers, until those weapons thundered in battle. Once they did, the legend of Teutonic supremacy evaporated. The pursuers suddenly found themselves pursued, a reversal they could no longer deny. Within that realization simmered the mental unraveling that hastened the European theater's resolution. The Pershing endures as a symbol of a core military axiom. While technical dominance proves fleeting, manufacturing prowess and inventive freedom in a democracy persist. It was a brutal education for the German tankmen, confronting the muzzle of a U.S. 90mm that demonstrated how American liberty could forge armaments rivaling the finest yields of German autocracy, albeit in scant quantities whose mental toll vastly outstripped their numerical footprint.